Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Fez, for your kind introduction. And thank you to the host for bringing us all together today for what is a very important forum. You know, so often I've heard throughout my life in politics, well, we got to get more young people involved. Where are all the young people? How do we get them interested in what's going on? I tell you, when I was your age, I was very interested, but there were no platforms like this. They're actually bringing your voices and your concerns about our future to the forefront. I want to start with what I think is a central issue. How many of you here have recently read the Gettysburg Address? Most of you. I just reread it again recently and was reminded of the really powerful words that Abraham Lincoln shared with us that are so relevant to where we are today, where he was talking about the great sacrifice that was made on those battlefields and a new nation being born, ensuring equality for every single one of us, and making sure that we best honor those who shed blood on that battlefield by bringing about a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Of, by, and for the people. How many of you think that we have that government today? Not a single hand raised. Because we don't. We don't. I can tell you, I've been in Washington now for nearly 7 years, and what we have is a government of, by, and for the very few, the very rich, and the very powerful. And this has a direct impact on every single issue that we're facing, whether we're talking about healthcare or climate change, education, criminal justice reform, immigration reform. We have a very few people who are making the decisions for us, but their decisions are not serving the interests of the people. So I'm running for president to bring the values that are at the heart of every service member, the heart of every soldier, the values of service above self to the White House, to lead our country, to unify our country, to reinstate these principles of honor, integrity, and service, and ensure that our government is truly of, by, and for the people, and that we are putting our people first, putting people ahead of profits, putting people ahead of the hyper-partisan politics that are tearing us apart, and fighting for our future as people and fighting for our planet. Thanks for joining us today. I'm looking forward to hearing your questions.
Now, Congresswoman, we're going to start off with the same question that every candidate today will receive. When registering to attend this event, about 57% of students reported that they'd be eligible to vote in the 2020 election, yet only 44% said that they plan to. If you win the Democratic nomination, what will you do to engage America's youth and increase voter participation?
Thank you. This is the central point here, is you've got to be motivated to want to be involved. So you're here, you've already made that first step. Most of you are registered to vote. But like most voters, and this is not something that is only limited to one age demographic or another. Unfortunately, over time, we've seen more and more people just say, you know what, my voice doesn't matter. It's not being heard. My vote won't make a difference, so why make time to both get informed and educated about the candidates who are asking for your vote, and then to go out and actually cast that vote. And this is the problem. This is a problem with our political system, that it has become one that is more interested in serving itself rather than actually listening to voters and working together to address those needs. So the kind of leadership that I seek to bring about is one that unifies our country, that treats people with respect. So much of what we see in Washington, and I've seen this from the very first few days that I got there, when I first got elected, was right away you saw like Democrats go over here, Republicans go over here. You're not encouraged to work together. In fact, you're discouraged to work together by the political parties who say, well, you know, if you work with that person from the other party, then you might help them get a political win and therefore help them in their reelection. We really want to beat them in that election, thinking always about how to win in the next election rather than saying, let's actually work together to get stuff done, to deliver results. Now, I'm a Democrat. I work with Democrats and Republicans in Congress. I've been able to be effective because I began my service there reaching out to others, recognizing, hey, You might disagree with me on 9 out of 10 issues, but on that 10th issue, let's do all that we can to pass legislation and actually fix a problem that's facing our country. So I think actually leading in this way, putting service above self, putting service to the people of our country ahead of any partisan politics is an essential part to making sure that, yes, we are engaging voters, but giving you as voters a reason to participate in the process, recognizing that the only way that we bring about the systemic change we need to see in our government to make sure it is serving the people is when we, the people, stand up and are engaged in that process.
I'd like to go to Sam Wolstenholme. He's a student at Drake University.
Morning.
What are you planning on addressing immediately to tackle climate change in your first 100 days of office?
Thank you. You know, the issue of protecting our environment is really what motivated me as a teenager to get involved, to step outside of my little, safe place and actually start to do something about the challenges I was seeing in my home state of Hawaii. So this is something I'm really personally passionate about. I think I was 16 or 17. I co-founded a nonprofit called the Healthy Hawaii Coalition that was focused on protecting our water and protecting our home state of Hawaii. It's the main reason why I ran for office when I was 21. And this issue, now that it's coming more and more to the forefront, is something that is a huge priority for me. As president, the very first thing that I would do is get back into the Paris Climate Accords. That's an important first step, but it is only a first step because we know that this is a global challenge that requires a global response. And while those Paris Accords were good, they were only a marginal fraction of where we know we need to go. I would lead in pushing through a plan like that is found in my legislation called the Off Fossil Fuels Act that would end the nearly $30 billion a year that we as taxpayers are giving to fossil fuel corporations, and instead redirect those resources towards investing in a truly renewable energy future and economy. We're talking about investing in renewable energy, investing in workforce training and jobs, and providing those opportunities, harnessing all of the innovation and technology that we have available to us to build this future that that'll be there for us, for you, for your kids, for their kids. I mean, this is what we're talking about. I think we've also got to look at agriculture. This is something that's not as often addressed when we're talking about climate change, but the old practices of well, they're not necessarily old. Multinational agribusiness corporations continue to persist in these agriculture models that actually ruin our soil, emit more carbon into our environment, and are completely unsustainable. So I think we've got to look at the incentives and the subsidies that are put forward in things like the Farm Bill to move away from that and move towards investing in and incentivizing in sustainable regenerative agriculture that will have a tremendously positive impact on our environment and on climate change.
Now, Congressman, a quick follow-up. You have proposed legislation that would require manufacturers to sell zero-emissions vehicles. In terms of ethanol production, Iowa's ranked first in the nation with a GDP of $4.6 billion. So what would be your or your plan to help Iowa farmers make that transition?
Well, I think this has to be part of a larger comprehensive plan. I want to point out something that President Trump did recently that was harmful in this area. Providing these waivers that basically said, hey, we're going to continue to choose to push forward more fossil fuels rather than incentivizing more renewable fuel sources. So this is something that we're working on in my campaign. We'll be releasing the details of this to make sure that we are using every part of the incentives that can be provided through things like the Farm Bill, through the Department of Energy, through different incentives through our tax code to make sure that we are moving forward in a sustainable way.
So that plan's coming soon?
Yep.
Okay. I'd like to bring in Mitchell Wallsmith. He's a student here at Theodore Roosevelt High School.
Hello.
Morning.
Many Americans have found your foreign policy refreshing compared to other candidates, but find some aspects of your relationship with certain foreign leaders worrying. Namely, your connection with Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. How can you get the American people to believe that this connection will not get in the way of American foreign policy?
Thank you. Thanks for your question. You know, it is a sad state of affairs in our politics today when simply meeting with a leader of another country is seen as being cozy, or you're a fan of, or you're an ally of, or you're a lover of dictators, which is the concern that's often raised, to detract away from the substance of the argument. Now, I've been very vocal in how we must end these wasteful regime change wars that our country has been waging now for too long, to redirect those resources, the over $6 trillion that we've spent since 9/11 alone on regime change wars in places like Iraq and Libya and continuing in Syria. Countless lives lost, both American lives and lives in these other countries. We've got to end this insanity, not start any new ones, and instead redirect those resources towards serving the needs of the American people here at home. We cannot afford to have a president and commander-in-chief who lacks the courage to meet with people like Bashar al-Assad, to meet with people like Kim Jong-un, to meet with people like President Rouhani of Iran, to meet with those who may be adversaries or dictators in the pursuit of our national security and in the pursuit of peace. The only alternative to diplomacy is war. As your president, as your commander-in-chief, I will meet with those who I need to meet with to achieve this objective of keeping the American people safe and in the pursuit of peace, following the great examples of presidents like JFK, who met with Khrushchev. He was vastly criticized for this. Reagan met with Gorbachev, and they negotiated a historic treaty, the INF Treaty, that drastically reduced the numbers of nuclear weapons and missiles in the world. Having these conversations, pursuing diplomacy, is essential for us as a country to move forward, to meet the objectives we have, and to best serve the interests of the American people.
Now, moving on to gun control, on your website you state that you're focusing on enacting bipartisan gun control measures that, quote, have a chance of being passed. I can speak louder. Okay. That, quote, have a chance of being passed into law rather than using the issue as political football, end quote. What are those bipartisan measures, and how will you get them passed given the gridlock in Congress?
This is such an important question right now that so many people are asking. What can we do? What can we do when too often we're seeing these headlines popping up on our phones, or we're hearing from people who directly have survived these mass shootings, loved ones of those who did not survive? Congress must work in a bipartisan way, and we just passed legislation a few months ago to make sure that we have universal background checks. We passed legislation that would close the Charleston loophole that allowed that shooter there in Charleston to be able to get a gun in his hands. These pieces of legislation passed with bipartisan support in Congress and are awaiting action now in the U.S. Senate. Now, leaders in Congress, we have to be able to work together in order to recognize that this is not an issue of us versus them. This is an issue about all of our lives and the lives of those who we love. Unfortunately, as we've seen more and more, these shootings are taking place in schools in many different parts of the country, taking place in places of worship, grocery stores, gas stations. There's nowhere that seems to be safe from this kind of attack. The more we can have dialogue, we can recognize that we can both uphold our Second Amendment rights while also passing sensible gun safety laws to make sure that these guns are not getting into the hands of those very few who would seek to do harm to others.
I'd like to go to Maya Sims, a student at Drake University.
Good morning. According to the CDC on Thursday, a total of 38 states have reported deaths relating to vaping. What steps would your administration take to address the vaping epidemic that continues to impact youth?
Thank you. You know, there's not been a lot of research and information that's been put out warning people about what the impacts of vaping are. I think that this has been a product that's unfortunately been marketed to young people. just as we see with tobacco, right? I mean, there's an age limitation on who can purchase cigarettes, and there's a lot of big warnings on there. If you choose to smoke cigarettes, you're going to be harming your own personal health. I think we need to see the same kinds of things happening with vaping, getting more information about what impact is this really having on you. At the end of the day, if you choose to do it as an adult, that's your business, but you need to know what the impacts and the ramifications are. And we certainly should not be marketing all of these different, fruit flavors out, things that are specifically going to target young people in school.
Right, I'd like to bring in Ryan Baum, a student at Roosevelt High School.
Hi. You have expressed support for the legalization of recreational marijuana, but have said you would allow the states to regulate its use. Why shouldn't the entire country have a uniform law regulating marijuana?
I have the only bipartisan bill in Congress that would completely end the federal prohibition on marijuana. Now, every state is different. Every state is choosing to regulate this differently. I think we're at nearly 30 or 33 states now that have already legalized either medicinal marijuana or full recreational marijuana. And every state, as our federal government allows, states manage the business within their states. There should be no federal prohibition in place. The problem with what we're seeing now with the existing federal prohibition is that even in states like mine, like Hawaii, that has legalized medicinal marijuana, they can't get insurance for those businesses. There are no banks that'll do business with them. Anyone who is around that industry, even though it's been legalized at the state level, is concerned about this dark cloud of federal prosecution that hangs over their head, given the existing federal law. So what you have instead is a cash market, which is not good, not good on so many different levels, and that really gets in the way of progress and these states being able to regulate themselves. There's a lot of different bills in Congress that deal with this issue, and there's many different layers of this. What my bill does is it takes away the federal prohibition, therefore dealing with things like the VA right now. If a veteran comes home from war with chronic pain from combat-related injuries, traumatic brain injury, post-traumatic stress, they go to the VA and they try to get help for that pain, and all they're given are highly addictive opioid drugs like Oxycontin. And a lot of friends of mine who've been in this situation, they don't want these drugs because they know how addictive they are and they know how dangerous they are. But because of this federal prohibition, the VA can't even refer a veteran to say, okay, well, if you're in a state like Hawaii, you can go to a dispensary and you can get some medicinal marijuana instead. It's prohibited by federal law. So getting rid of this prohibition at the federal level can have a positive impact on so many levels, including things like the opioid epidemic. In states where they have legalized some form of marijuana, there has been a direct, significant correlation in a reduction of opioid addiction and opioid-related deaths.
Your next question will come from Kate Miller. She's an English teacher at Central Academy here in Des Moines.
Public education is one of the last forms of institutional segregation based on poverty in this country. As long as we continue to fund our public schools based on property taxes, we will see issues with equity. What will you do to offer student access, either virtually or physically, to the best educators?
Thank you very much. My parents are both educators by trade and training. My father-in-law is still a public high school teacher in Hawaii and just understand deeply the importance of education. Now, every state has different models for how education is funded. In my home state of Hawaii, property taxes do not fund education. So I think the point here is making sure that whatever the different models are that each state has, we've got to have a baseline level of equity and support so that we don't see, and I've heard from teachers in different communities how if you have wealthy communities who can afford to pay more, they have better schools and more resources. Then you have communities who are more poor or in poverty, they have to pay more to be able to even get the basic needs covered, and they can't afford it, ultimately. And this is where I think there's got to be a partnership between the federal government and the federal taxpayer dollars that are going to support education to make sure that that equity is there. We got to stop just paying lip service to education. And I think one of the most important things that we need to do, the thing that I would do as president, to listen to teachers like you, to build a coalition of teachers who represent the diverse communities across this country, big cities, small towns, rural, urban, north, south, east, west, and recognize that we would do best to listen to those who are actually providing the education to our kids to see how best to equip them. Being a teacher in Hawaii is different than being a teacher in Iowa. Some things are the same, but we've got to empower you to be able to do what you do best and to make sure that we've got the resources to both pay you what you deserve and make sure that our kids have what they need.
So you're talking about listening to teachers. Would you have some kind of like a council maybe under your administration that would be comprised
exactly.
of teachers?
Building a coalition of teachers that represent the diversity of our country. Because I've seen just in the time that I've been in Congress and what I've heard throughout my time in state government in Hawaii as well as the city council, you get this top-down approach coming from the big government, Department of Education in Washington, that is so often completely out of touch with the reality of what's actually happening in the classrooms every day. And so what the result is often you just have teachers who have to teach to a test in order to get certain grades and marks to be quote-unquote successful so that a school can continue to get funding and show, hey, our kids are getting educated, but are they really getting what they need for that full education? Are you able to spend that time with students making sure that they're understanding the concepts that you're trying to teach? So I think we've got to turn this thing upside down and actually focus on where the action really is happening and make sure that that is what informs the policies that we're making.
Now, we received another question online from one student who asks, you have advocated for tuition-free college for families up to $125,000 in income. Why should people who did not go to college have to pay for those expenses?
This is one component of a larger vision that we have to have for higher education. Recognizing that going and getting a four-year college degree isn't for everybody. So what we need to focus on is not just how can we make sure that you have a tuition-free education or that it's affordable for you in a four-year bachelor's degree program, but what about apprenticeships? What about vocational training? What about those who want to enter the workforce? Or maybe start a small business right out of high school. I think we've got to look at this from a bigger picture perspective on how we can best provide those resources that provide you with the opportunity that is best suited to what you actually want to do with your life. I think it's a problem that we're in a culture today where having a bachelor's degree and a master's degree has become like a status thing. It almost doesn't matter what you get it in, but if you want to get a job in a certain area, it's happening right now in the military right now. If I want to get promoted, I have to get a master's degree in anything. It doesn't really matter what it is, but in order to be competitive with my peers, I just need to have a master's degree. Let's look at what the skills are that we actually need. Rather than encouraging more and more folks to go into debt, more and more people to feed into the rising cost of higher education, which we have to deal with as well, let's focus on what skills do you have, what skills do you need to be able to pursue the line of work that you choose in your life. So I think we have to look at this from a broader perspective on achieving that objective of how we can best help equip people to pursue their line of work or their dreams.
You have a couple of minutes to offer closing remarks.
All right. That time went by quick. Thank you very much. Great questions today. Look, being involved and engaged in this process is the most important thing. As we talk about the different challenges and issues that we're facing, they can sometimes seem too great. The obstacles are too big to overcome. Big money in politics. How do we overcome this? How do we bring about this change? How do we mend the divides and build bridges to bring our country together so that we can actually deliver results? The only way that we make the kind of big change that we need to see is by being actively engaged and involved in the process. Throughout our country's history, we've seen when big changes have happened, it's happened when we, the people, have stood up and made sure that our voices are heard, made sure that those who are in positions of power are not allowed to let their money drown out our voices. So your engagement and involvement in this process is essential. It is essential for the things that you care about right now. It's essential for the kind of future that you want to live in. On every single one of these issues, I encourage you to be informed, be engaged, be involved in this process at a minimum as a voter, but think about how you can do more, how you can get more of your friends involved in the process. Think about running for office yourself. When I first ran for office at 21 years old, a lot of people said, she's too young, maybe she should wait another 10, 20, 30 years, her voice doesn't really matter. But I went out and I knocked on thousands of doors all across the district, and I earned that support from people because I was passionate about fighting for them. I am passionate about fighting for you to bring about these values of service above self to the White House so that we can all come together to bring about that change that we need to see that puts people ahead of politics, that puts people ahead of profits, so that we can together move forward. Thank you so much for having me here today, everybody. Have a great day. Thank you.